We had a look at Solgaleo, and now it's time to check out Lunala. Interestingly enough, we don't have as much information on Lunala as we do with Solgaleo. Kind of doesn't make sense because they were both shown in the trailer, and they also did get their own, like, special page and stuff. When we go and break it down, yeah, we don't get as much. Maybe it's fitting because Lunala is a ghost-type Pokemon, a bit more secretive in that way, but let's go and read the lore and see what's different. Since ancient times, Lunala has been honored as the emissary of the moon. It is referred to with reverence as the beast that calls the moon, which is actually very similar to Solgaleo, that is the beast that devours the sun. So we have, like, sun, moon, beast relations right here. And then we have Lunala is constantly absorbing light and converting it into energy. With its wings, it spreads to absorb the surrounding light, and glittering like a crescent moon. Resembles a beautiful night sky. Actually, yes it does. And Lunala's signature Moongeist beam attack releases an ominous beam of light that disregards the target's ability. So very, very similar to Solgaleo, you know, disregards target ability, and it does have an existing ability that's kind of adapted in a new way. So Full Metal Body on Solgaleo is similar to Clear Body on Metagross, and then we also have Lunala's ability Shadow Shield. New ability that no previous Pokemon has had, Lugia Dragonite. With the Shadow Shield ability, a Pokemon will take less damage from an attack that lands when the Pokemon has full hit points. So I just pulled up Lugia because it's very similar. I mean, at least as a Psychic, people were speculating that Lunala could potentially be a Flying type, and the way that Solgaleo kind of just rips off Metagross, you know, we just have Multi-Scale ability, which is effectively the same. Just wanted to kind of point that out at the same time. Now, it is really interesting when we go and we look at Lunala, because Lunala's Moongeist attack seems to be a Ghost-type move, which means that it could hint at Solgaleo's being a Steel-type attack. Mostly because Geist is German for spirit or ghost or something like that, and it's interesting with like how it calls upon the moon in that way. Now, some people have been speculating that there's a potential that Solgaleo has a dual-type thing going on, like with Flying Press. Flying Press has an interesting interaction in that it counts as both a flying and a fighting move, so you can kind of mix it up, and it'll even take into consideration the correct damage calculations, like Bug, Steel, and Rock. They're actually going to be neutral hits instead of having super damage or resisted damage taking a favor right there, and we can see this in the trailer. So with Solgaleo, Solgaleo's attack is actually going to do neutral damage to a Salamence. Now, if it was Fire Steel, the dragon typing would resist it a bit, so it looks like it's just going to be primary instead of like trying to split it, even though Sun Steel and Moon Guy seems like there could be some kind of split there. Like, why is there nothing that relates directly to the moon or the sun with Solgaleo? I mean, Ghost kind of does, but I think Fairy is a lot more common with moon, with like a Moonblast and Moonlight and all of these other moon references that we get with the moon. So much how Solgaleo ignores the sun as a fire-type Pokemon, we don't have anything going on right here. Now let's go and watch the trailer for how Lunala plays out. Psychic Ghost, Shadow Shield. Say that 5 times really fast. And it seems like a very patient Pokemon. Just kind of sits there, absorbs power, and it doesn't like flap. It doesn't do anything. So its psychic powers are what gives it its ability to kind of levitate and fly around. We get to see this super space beam thing, and Moongeist beam comes out. And the funny thing was that when I was looking at this for the first time, I was like, oh, of course it's a ghost type move. It hit Gengar super effective, but at the same time, a psychic type move would do the same. Much how a psychic type move would be the same on a Salamence as a neutral hit. But Gengar would also have a neutral if it was like a fairy kind of split. So if it was Fairy Ghost or some kind of dual type attack like the Flying Press move, it would be a neutral hit and Salamence would have it resisted. So that's kind of debunked right there, which is a little unfortunate. It'd be really cool, but at the same time, it kind of shows that, alright, with Lunala and Solgaleo, they have it to where they're weak against the thing they're strong against in some kind of pretty crazy way. I even made a little graphic right here that just kind of puts it out there. You know, when you think of the sun, you think of daytime, you know, sun is fire, even though the sun is a ball of gas and plasma and stuff. There's always someone in the comments that says that. But initially, when you think of it, you know, there's a lot of other fire representations, that the sun is related to fire in some kind of way like that, or also just all kinds of references across every kind of genre and fantasy and gaming and whatnot. Now, the darkness for Lunala is actually really interesting because you can see that, alright, as a Steel-type Pokemon, it's going to be weak against Fire on Solgaleo, and as a Ghost-type Pokemon, it's actually going to be 4 times weak to Dark as a Psychic as well, even though Dark, it's dark outside, it's nighttime, you know, night equals darkness in that kind of realm, much how sun and light equals fire to some degrees. So that's actually a really interesting thing to consider, just that, like, they have that weakness. But for Solgaleo, it at least makes sense that you can go the beast that devours the sun. You can Google that, and you can find a lot of things that seem very symbolic, like of Solgaleo devouring the sun and having that alchemical symbol relate back to metals. With Lunala as like the emissary of the moon or the beast that summons the moon, there's no depictions of that whatsoever. So that's another reason why it feels like Lunala is a bit more secluded. It feels like it doesn't have as much information going on for it, and we could also see that with the trailer, that if we look at the actual trailer, Solgaleo, it actually fights a Pokemon. We can see its hit point stat, we can see the things going on with Salamence, and that was another thing I kind of screwed up on the Solgaleo video. That Solgaleo has a very high 212 hit point stat, but at the same time when we look at Salamence, Salamence is actually receiving damage, so we can see that it has a 155. With Lunala, as we just watched Lunala, there's at no point do we see its hit points, we just see it attacking a Gengar, and even then the Gengar is going to have a very low amount of hit points as well at the 120. So let's go to a Pokemon damage calculator, because I feel that this might be a really interesting way to take a look at it. So let's quickly go and pull up Gengar. Gengar, if you have 0 IVs and then you drop it down to level 50 as well, that's going to be a 120. Well, if we go back, we see that's a 120. So it seems like the Pokemon have 0 IVs. Now, the same with Salamence. Salamence has 0 IVs and hit points with 0 EVs at its like lowest base. But Solgaleo would be very, very high. So I'm going to pull up like... Well, actually, no, Lunala would be closest to Hoopa and Solgaleo and whatever, so let's go and pull up Hoopa, and let's also go and pull up, like, Metagross, because Metagross is very similar to Solgaleo as well. Psychic Ghost, Steel Psychic. And the crazy thing is to figure out that all you need is a 152, I believe, and we take out the IVs, and then we cut it down to level 50 to hit that 512. So either these Pokemon have insane amounts of base hit points, or they have EVs and IVs, and then that was kind of like messing around with how the damage is kind of perceived for those Pokemon, that the Salamence and Gengar that were just kind of coded in as an example were blank slates, whereas Solgaleo and Lunala actually had base stats and stats behind them that were a little more untapped. And at the same time, like Lunala, it's very hard to pinpoint how much Moongeist Beam is going to do for damage, because it's one-shotting Gengar. Gengar is frail, and it's hitting a super effective hit as well. So that's kind of points against us, but we can also look at other legendary Pokemon and try to piece this together. A very interesting thing is that if Solgaleo's 152 base hit points hold up, that means Lunala has to have a 152 base hit points. But yeah, Lunala looks kind of frail. It doesn't seem like a Pokemon that has a 150 base hit points, which would be absolutely absurd. It would be higher than any of the other legendary Pokemon that we have. That's why I pull up the stat chart on Cerebi, which brings us another very interesting insight. So, if we look at legendary dual combos, Xerneas, Yveltal, they always have the same amount of hit points. We can see that Kyogre and Groudon, they have 100 in their base hit points at the same time, and we can see like Lugia and Ho-Oh, they're going to have 106, 106, so it's all shared, which means that Solgaleo, either there's going to be some kind of mold breaking here, they'll have the same base 680 stat total, and a lot of times there's going to be like mirrored stats or something that's at least related in some kind of way, that we can see like Xerneas and Yveltal, their stats are actually the exact same, and it just plays around with different Pokemon doing like different abilities and moves and stuff, and I'm wondering how it's going to play into like Solgaleo and Lunala. Going off the damage calculations, we would have to see that Solgaleo most likely has an attack stat around 150 or 170, which doesn't leave a lot of room for hit points, and say it would just be like a huge beefy hit point Pokemon. Alright, so it has like 152 on the hit points, a 168 or 158 in the attack, and then the rest of the stats would be really low and kind of messy. So that would play around with like the stats I already put up, and it kind of makes it very complicated. At the same time, Lunala would also be a lot different. As I've said, it doesn't seem like a tanky Pokemon. It seems like it would be a massive, almost either sweeper, or it'd have just very high offensive stats and then nothing on defenses. It couldn't really be lower on the offenses because Solgaleo's damage is kind of massive, so I wonder if we'd actually like flip these stats, that the special defense would go into the hit points instead, and then we'd like lose 2 points off of the attack, and then the rest of the stats would be like 80s, 100s, 90s, or something like that, because I mean that's what Solgaleo shows us. So Solgaleo, instead of having the high defense, even though Steel-type Pokemon have generally higher defenses than hit point stats, it would be absolutely crazy. So that's one of the really interesting quirks that's come about this. So with that, they could beat out every legendary Pokemon that we've seen. I mean, it would be interesting if Game Freak wanted to introduce these guys as just like straight up the highest hit point Pokemon. Yeah, you could beat out Giratina and then just call it a day by only making it 2 instead of 10 or 20. So it does make a little sense right there, but still an absolute insane amount of damage or amount of hit points. And then like maybe they just have like really high offenses, okay? Like maybe. But then what does that do for their speed? Because it seems like they'd be pretty fast at the same time. Now, from the trailer, we actually can't tell if Lunala or Solgaleo outspeed these Pokemon because it just kind of cuts to them battling. We don't see Gengar attacking and then a non-cut version into that. See, suddenly we just go into the animation. Same with Salamence. Even though we see like Intimidate and stuff activating, we don't see Salamence attack. It just cuts to, we don't even see the move being called. It doesn't even say like, Solgaleo uses this move. it goes straight to that. So we can't get an idea of the speed, but we also can't really get an idea of the stats. So I guess the stat guessing was a little flawed at the same time, because there's either too many variables or it's so insane it's actually very hard to fathom and like kind of theory craft the stats in general. That's another very interesting thing about it. If anything, though, we learned that legendaries have the same amount of hit points and roughly mirrored stats in some kind of way. You know, there's 90s, there's 30s, that's going to be a 150. And also, the speed swapping is not something unheard of. So that's why when we go back to Lunala versus Solgaleo, Solgaleo could realistically, as some kind of bulky Steel-type Pokemon, have a lower speed than Lunala, who I'm guessing will be around 100, maybe even 110, maybe have lower attacks and defenses and stuff. So you can shuffle around the stats like that and still get much different things, and that's what Lugia and Ho-Oh show us over here, that we can see it's a 110 base speed versus a 90 base speed, and then that kind of gets shifted around over here. Alright, so these stats are going to be changing, and legendary games, it's kind of weird because we know base stats, we know that there's some kind of familiarity there, but the numbers are so ridiculous it's pretty hard to pinpoint. Other than that, it's like, alright, we got the psychic type calling right there. You know, I had my crazy theorist hair of Pokemon's Sun and Moon psychic typings, but yep, that's what we got right now. So yeah, we know more about Solgaleo because it has a more established culture behind it. I'm wondering if maybe Lunala is just made up, that it's meant to be some kind of mirror, that it's like, okay, so we know more about the beast that devours the sun, but there's nothing that has relation to the moon, so maybe Lunala is kind of made to that, so it's a little more clouded, but at the same time, it could actually mean a lot just for made-up stuff and trying to come up with a cool concept. I really think the sun and moon dynamic works out. As for figuring everything else about it, looks like we don't have as much as I initially thought, but at the same time, still pretty cool. So if you guys enjoyed the video, hope you all have a nice day. Thank you very much for watching.